To welcome everyone and tell you thank you so much for your support of FAM over these many, many years. This is our fourth of one on fundamentals of fundraising, and this one's going to focus on advocacy, building relationships. We're very fortunate that we've had some great speakers so far and some really wonderful participation. And I'm with you today. We also will be doing this in presentation style. The webinar is being recorded, and there's a chat box at the bottom if you have a question, or also if we're in the middle of talking and you've got something that you'd like answered right then, if you'll just click the little button that says raise your hand, I'll unmute you, and that way you can ask your question online, because we've got a small group, so it makes it easy to do. We will also allow for question and answers at the very end, and you'll notice at the bottom on the right-hand side where your screen is, you'll see handouts. I've uploaded 3 handouts. One of those is the presentation today. One is a resource page, and also one is a comparison of funding from 2006 until current for Division of Cultural Affairs and Division of Historical Resources grants. We could not do what we do without our partners, which is Visit Florida and the Division of Cultural Affairs, Culture Builds Florida. And of course, y'all know who I am. If you don't, then you will after this, but I know that I see who's signed in, so I know most of you very well. Thank you so much for joining. And then I'm very happy to introduce Greg Black, who's an attorney and governmental affairs consultant for Gunster. Greg is a lobbyist here in Tallahassee, and I've gotten to know him really well. We work together well. He brings a wealth of experience, and so I'm excited to have him join us today. And also, we've got Martha Wells, who's the Chief Community Engagement Officer with the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature. She also brings some wonderful experience, not just at her current position, but her previous 30 years of experience with nonprofits. So I'm excited that Martha was able to join us. I'm going to start off with just a quick comment about what museums and nonprofits can and can't do, because I know there's a lot of confusion sometimes that you're not allowed to do to advocate because you're a nonprofit or you're a C3 organization. And most of this information I pulled from other national nonprofit organizations, because I felt like it was better to use other information than my own, because it just shows that this is absolutely the truth, that we can advocate and museums can lobby. You know, there's restrictions on the percentage of time, that type of thing, but it is such a, first of all, a vague percentage, and also the amount of time you would spend doing it compared to what you do in your day-to-day operations is so minor that it should not raise any flags. Of course, if you ever have any questions, you can seek legal advice. But one of the questions I get a lot is, what is advocacy and what is lobbying? So you'll see the 3 definitions there on your screen that tell you that advocacy is educating. It's basically what we all do every day, not just with our elected officials or our appointed officials, but with our organizations in general, because we're constantly teaching the public and people what we do and why we do it. I'm constantly teaching it to my family. So that's basically what advocacy means. Lobbying is, especially with grassroots, is encouraging your staff or advocates to ask legislators to take a specific position. So it may be, if we're seeking grant funding, we ask our different staff members, our board members, to talk to their elected officials and to ask them to support what we're looking for. Or if you're direct lobbying, you're going to specific legislators yourself, and you're talking to them and you're making your position known, and you're asking them to, either support or go against some, maybe it's a piece of legislation, or it's, if you're asking them to support funding that you're seeking. So those just give you kind of a brief recap of what advocacy is and what lobbying is. The next slide just shows you some of the tools that we created this year, we hired an outside firm to help us with our communication and build a platform within our website that talked about the true economic impact of museums, why it's important to fund them. We also listed all of the grants that were recommended by the Division of Cultural Affairs and the Division of Historical Resources to try to increase our funding and get us back to where we think we should be. I think both of these documents were very helpful. We passed them out to our members at Tourism Day, and they took them around to all their visits to legislators. We also took them, hand-delivered them to every member of the Appropriations Committee and the different subcommittees that deal with our funding issues. We will be redoing this again this year to make sure that we have it available for all of our members to share when you're going to legislative delegation meetings or having a legislator over to visit your organization or whenever you need them. And the next slide shows our final results after the governor signed the budget. These are specifically the grants that are vetted and go through a panel. This is the list that was provided to the legislature, and it shows the approximate amount of funding that we received. You'll see one of the documents that I uploaded is the comparison, and it will show you that compared to last year, we had quite a significant gain because, as we all know, last year was not a very great year for funding for culture and arts. So this year we received 29% of the requests for cultural and museum grants. The Cultural Builds Florida program was fully funded. Cultural Facilities was funded at $5.97 million, which funded the top 19. 19 didn't quite get all their funding, but it was close. Small Matching Preservation Grants was fully funded. Special categories received a little over $5 million, which also funded through number 18. That was definitely a significant increase over the previous year, and we will continue to build on this. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to offer this webinar, was so that we could go ahead and get people thinking about it now and make sure that we're doing it all year long, not just when we need them. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know Greg and Martha both are going to touch on those specifics. So now I'm going to turn it over to Greg, and I'm going to drive his slides. So if you hear him tell me to move the slide, that means I need to move on.
Well, if you hear me, if it looks like I forgot to say something, please tell me and make sure that she notices or say something via chat.
Okay.
Nice to meet everybody. Glad to be here. And obviously, as Melinda said, feel free to let her know and jump in if you have a question. It's easy to kind of hit pause and reset in the middle of something and get back onto it. You know, the first thing that I always like to tell anybody that's interested in the legislative process is that we need to know the playing field. And that includes kind of the timing and process and the key players. And so our first slides are all going to be kind of about that. I'm going to try and move a little bit quicker through some of this just because it is something you can pull up. Melinda has this available as a PDF for everybody on the call, and I think she's putting it on the website too after the fact. But it will give you kind of just a quick overview. So Florida does have a part-time legislature. That means that everybody has a true day job at home, but comes up here and is considered part-time. What that means is they don't get fully paid. They get $29,000 a year to be elected, and they're supposed to be here part-time. It ends up being, consuming probably about 80% of their daily lives, though, between committee weeks, where there's 6 weeks, between September and December. That's 1 in September, 1 in December, and then 2 weeks each in October and November. Sessions early this year, starting on January 14th. That will make the budgeting process a little different than in traditional years where session starts in March, just because we will be doing it so much earlier, and revenue forecasting will be a little bit further away from the traditional timeline. And as you know, I'm sure from listening to Melinda and just having to deal with this at your own institution, the budget does start on July 1st every year. It does end on June 30th. So we have just started the fiscal year for 2019-2020 here in the state. Everything we're doing now, though, is looking for 2020-2021. And Melinda, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. One of the bigger things to think of too, and Melinda mentioned, lobbying is not it's not to me a targeted one day, 1 hour or one day at the Capitol type thing. It's kind of intertwine it in everything you do with your business and your museum or your cultural affairs attraction. And that means, like I said, knowing the key players. It's important to know all the statewide electeds. It's obviously important to know the Secretary of State, who's appointed by the governor, as she serves and oversees an agency that is extremely important to every one of your facilities. I say that because of a couple different reasons. One, the governor's got veto authority. He's also got a recommended budget that comes out 30 days before session begins. Kind of makes or breaks the tone on certain things. You'll remember the Visit Florida fights over the last few years, fights with Enterprise Florida, just a direction in general of cultural affairs funding. As Melinda said, the association, I think, had a very, very, very strong year this year compared to last year, and I think in a very difficult budget year. It was the state's biggest budget ever. However, if you look at some of the projects that were funded, a lot of them were bigger ticket items focused on environmental restoration. So the legislature gave $50 million extra there, and the governor did veto just a little over $125 million, $130 million. That hurts. However, luckily, the cultural affairs money did stay in place, and so that's great. And it's also a benefit of Secretary of State Laurel Lee from the Tampa Bay area. I actually saw her go and as she was doing her thank you tour to Chair Jay Trumbull for the funding there, and also for some technology stuff that he did for him. So I think Secretary Lee is going to do a great job. I think you guys are in a position to kind of reset. There's been some changes within the agency there. So if you have an opportunity, I would say outreach to any of these folks is great. As all politics are local. All these people are traveling the state as they have a statewide impact. They all have different focuses, but it is important to kind of check and see if there's some good opportunity and provide an invitation. I think Martha's going to speak a little bit more to that, and kind of how the bishop has done that in the past. And it'll kind of be interwoven in some of my discussion later. Melinda, you can go ahead and switch to the next slide. So this is just a quick snapshot. It gives you the full picture of the breadth of the executive branch in Florida. We're not going to spend much time on it. You guys know where you live. It is all within and under the executive office of the governor and the Secretary of State. Traditionally, obviously some others, if you have a marina impact, or if you're in a national forest, you'll have other things that come in with DEP or maybe DAX or other agencies. But that's just a quick overview. You can switch to the next one. And then as part of this education process, it is good for folks to know kind of what the dynamics are, what we're dealing with. Not every state has term limits. Florida does. This is something that came in the early 2000s. In the Senate and the House, there's an 8-year term limit. However, the length of each terms are different. Senate is 4-year terms, which means they get 2, barring some weird redistricting, which does allow for senators to get a little bit extra time. They represent approximately 475,000 constituents. That number will likely go up a bit because that is based on old census data number and not current data. So the next couple of years, probably a little bit inflated. And the current composition is Republican. However, it's not a strong, it's not a super majority. It's enough members for the Republicans to still control. However, it does make certain issues difficult. And I hearken back to all politics are local, so keep that in mind. Florida House is 120, so there are 3 representatives for every senator, representing 160,000 people. Same kind of deal. Most House members only serve 8 years. If ever it's about 9.5 is the longest if they come in some weird special election. Okay, Melinda. The important Senate leadership is kind of ferreted out by, you have the Senate president, you've got his leadership team, which is actually larger than the top row here, but these are the key folks that we look at. The other one that's not included on this that is important is obviously the appropriations chairman, that's Rob Bradley. The lower level, because there is such a strong Democratic class or caucus, there is a pretty strong structure in their leadership, and these are kind of their 4 key folks. Just there as names. I did not put the locations, but obviously Bill Galvano is Bradenton, David Simmons is Orlando, Kathleen Passidomo is Naples, Audrey Gibson is Jacksonville, Bill Montford is Tallahassee, Bobby Powell and Lori Berman are both in West Palm Beach, West Palm Beach area. So just to give you guys a little cross section, the next slide speaks a little bit more to Senate President Bill Galvano, and will give you a little bit of idea of what we, how his thought process got us to where we are with the upcoming budget, right? So keep taxes low. We had a tax package again. That's great. We didn't have to with all the spending that they tried to, cram in with infrastructure improvements, which is another one of his priorities, with the hurricane, addressing red tide, that kind of stuff. So, those are just a list of his, and there's probably 8 to 10 things on that list. Keep that in mind when we get further on and we talk a little bit about Speaker Oliva. The next slide is going to show you the House leadership, much like the Senate, obviously 120 members. It's a little broader. The Democrats did take a different tack this time, and it's somewhat unusual. Minority Leader Keone McGee really kind of flattened out his caucus and gave a lot of leadership positions, which I think put a number of Democrats in a position where they were tasked with areas of authority, right? So you saw that, like Carlos Guillermo Smith and Anna Escamame really took on arts and culture, and then kind of the response to the Pulse Memorial and issue and gun safety. Those were kind of their priority issues, and they were very vocal on them. I think, folks like Ben Diamond took business issues and tort reform issues to heart. Geraldine Thompson does a lot with cultural affairs and museums. But I think that priority focus from the Democrats did help when you're looking at what their asks were, right? They wanted some acknowledgement. They wanted some return to the culture and arts. And that was, I've heard directly from the appropriations chairman, like, hey, we can't give them everything they want, but there's a lot of them hounding us for this, cultural affairs money. I think back to the all politics are local is that, you guys talk to your members, and a lot of them are in areas that, may have a Democratic representative. And I think they were vocally aligned and together to advocate for that. And I think House leadership also saw that as a priority. I don't know, I don't know that will always be the case. I think this year it became such a problem after last year's ignorance from the House and kind of vacuum from House and Senate leadership with a strong champion, just because of kind of how politics shook out. But I think you do have a good core class in the House that understands it now. So I think that is a benefit. If we go to the next slide, it is on Speaker Oliva. If you look at his priority list, it's very small. It screams of a Republican conservative, right? Less government regulation, keep taxes low, expand school choice, rein in, higher ed spending. The only two things on here that are kind of unique is the healthcare, explosion in cost that he sees, and they're both in the same ilk. So his biggest priority was to change the way we do healthcare in Florida, and he traded everything pretty much for that. That was his driving force, or driving focus. I'm sorry. And so he changed the way the hospitals are regulated, how they're licensed, and he also worked to get drug import changed to explore whether or not we can be importing drugs from countries that have better, quite frankly, have socialized medicine, but get better, rates because it is one giant entity purchasing instead of, 50 different state agencies, federal Medicaid, Medicare, and then all the private insurers. So, Speaker of the House, it just kind of goes to show you the differences in what their priorities are. There's some overlap, but then, Bill Galvano's focus on red tide, research and focused on infrastructure improvement. They are disparate in that sense. So we can go to the next slide. And again, this one's going to be pretty quick. It is just a quick overview of where it sits. There is obviously a lot more information on committees of reference and importance. With museums, it kind of depends on what you're doing. For the association, it's the Transportation Economic Development Committees in both the House and Senate. It's the full probes. And then obviously anything that's working on economic affairs, Visit Florida, tourism money, anything that incentivizes folks to come to Florida, to visit, the great state, to help those businesses and those institutions do better and get the word out. Obviously, that's a focus. So, but no need to really spend that much time on that slide. So this is kind of my key concepts, right? So Melinda mentioned it's a daily task, and I don't think that means that you daily have to be talking to the legislator that is in your area, but you have to be present to win. So that means everything from, if a staff member reaches out and says, hey, we're going to be in the area for the delegation meeting, we thought we'd come and do a tour, what's going on? Or a board member of yours says, hey, I just happen to know that I went to high school with this guy and we've been great friends for 20 years, now he's elected. Invite him over. Repetition is key, and I don't think it's a bad comparison that your interactions with elected officials and staff is very similar to that of donor relations. You want to treat them as a quote unquote donor. You want to foster that relationship. You want to make sure that you have a strong, comfortable relationship. Staff is key for that purpose because they can either block you, they can help you, make sure information is passed through, but also as you're spending that time fostering that relationship, do it when you need it the least. Do it in the off season. They got stuff they need to do. They may want to hold a community roundtable. All of a sudden, it may be perfect for them to do it in your conference room, and you guys get the added benefit of, if there's any media coverage, hey, the bishop held the Bradenton Chamber of Commerce where they spoke about the opioid epidemic and red tide research with the local delegation, blah, blah, blah. You guys have an opportunity that museum have an opportunity to post and use social media, which is a passive way to interact with legislators instead of actually having to be in front of them. And it's also really cheap. I mean, it's not necessarily even another staff member. The bigger museums can obviously spend some money on that, but your name ID and involvement with those folks, because they are considered influencers in the social media world. One thing I like to say is the first time you need something from the legislature, governor, or an executive agency cannot be the first time you meet them. If you go in asking with your hand out for something, or you run in with an emergency, it's not going to be received well. Now, it's just like anything, right? You can't go ask somebody for a giant donation right out of the gate. But, if you've had a relationship with them for 5, 10, 15 years, it may not be odd to be able to ask them for a $100,000 donation or a $200,000 donation. And so, those relationships go a long way. The other thing that folks very seldom realize is many of these staff members circle back around and in 10 years will be the elected official. So keep that in mind when you're talking to staff. Melinda, we can go to the next slide. So obviously there are reasons why anybody asks, right? There's personal, professional, and political. And I'm going to use Bill Galvano as my example case, right? And so a personal issue for him, right? Maybe he has a neighbor who lost a son to the opioid epidemic. So Bill worked on opioid reform last year, dealing with some funding issues, try and get money down to local first responders. Personal issue. Professional issue. Galvano is a lawyer. He gets involved in litigation issues. He gets involved in real estate law issues. He gets involved in commercial transaction issues. That's because that's what he knows and what he does. Political issues. For example, red tide research. Bradenton had a terrible time with red tide last year. They weren't the only area impacted. He heard it up and down the west coast of Florida and some of the southeast Florida coast. And so politically for him, if he did not do something, it was negative. Now, those are not, none of those are necessarily Republican or Democrat issues. So keep that in mind. I mean, it is very nonpartisan. And what your museums or attractions do is also nonpartisan. It is local. It can be personal. They can remember going to you since they were 5 years old. It can be professional. Their next door neighbor may be your, one of your curators. It can be political because it's a good win to help a nonprofit. Nobody, and it's not necessarily even a handout, just the interaction with you all is positive for them politically. And so that's one of the things that having a relationship is there. It also helps solve your concern if you do come to them with an ask later on. We can pop to the next one. And then obviously there's 4 factors of influence, right? So this kind of ties in with that last slide. It's something I've seen on a presentation that I really like. It is based off of a CIA study from back in how folks were able to destabilize governments. So MICE stands for money, ideology, compromise, or ego. Is this surprising? It shouldn't be surprising to anybody on the call. Politicians are seeking to get reelected. They like to be elected, or else they wouldn't be there in the first place. Money means contributions. In the destabilizing of the government context, it means bribery and lining somebody's pocketbook. But here it means helping them get reelected. Most nonprofits do not have a mechanism to do such, and much like Melinda's conversation on advocacy versus lobbying versus kind of doing more than what a 501c3 is permitted to do. You may not be able to do money from the museum. However, there is a benefit to, if you're doing the groundbreaking, having them come in, be there to shovel dirt, have a hard hat on, get a picture, tweet it out, and get that reprinted in the paper. Same with the ego. That honestly ties in. Ideology is if Bill Galvano is committed to fixing red tide, I think Bill Galvano was willing to kind of grasp for anybody that thought they had a solution or a process to try and work on their issues. Compromise, if they're able to fix something, they can then go spend time on other things. So if they're able to help you get an overpass moved or a road interchange changed or a parking garage built, that helps them locally because it may solve your issue, it may solve a developer's issue, it may streamline, something that was getting bogged down at the local level. That also plays into their ego in the sense that if they feel like they're the deal maker, they feel like they have buy-in into what you're trying to accomplish. And so that goes a long way. To the next slide, this is kind of a long list of issues and ways to build your platform. I honestly think if you go to the last bullet point, that is kind of key to everything that you should be doing. Like we said, your company is neither Republican nor Democrat. It is, advancing for the greater good of what the core mission is. Everything you do is content. That means you don't have to create anything if you're doing these meetings. And, every, once a month you get somebody to come in, or once every 2 weeks, or you do a kind of open house and invite folks, that creates the content. So you can use that to do all or any of these other things. Obviously, the sixth one down is deliver your fundraising in bulk. That only counts if you have an active board that is willing to do so, which I would suggest if you have that comfort level with your board, I would suggest trying to ask. It doesn't have to be much, but it goes a long way. If you can't fundraise for your board, for elected officials, a good thank you campaign, a good active board engagement, with key contacts is very, very important. And, people like to do things where they feel like, oh, great, I helped somebody, I did a good job. So this is kind of a list. There's one in there that says pick, use partisan hype language. That kind of just means, it doesn't have to be necessarily partisan hype language. I think it means, I would think of it more as be aggressive in social media. Do something that's kind of a wow factor. That is bold, and it's not necessarily, and when it says pick fights, I don't necessarily pick fights on Twitter, but it is, the sarcasm. It gets folks engaged and communicative. The next page is going to be my last slide or my last piece until we have questions. So Martha, if you want to get there, it just has a couple quick links for you guys that I think are important. Has the Florida House, which is the Find Your Legislator one. I think everybody needs to know that for the House and the Senate. They're both there. From those websites, you can also get back to the committee pages and kind of all the interim committee projects. Also, the Division of Cultural Affairs website, which I would assume Melinda has on her similar page later on. But look forward to chatting and answering questions later or now.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, Martha, you're up.
Hello, everyone. So Greg's slide there was a beautiful segue. What I wanted to show here was just these parallel tracks and remind you all that if you're a really small museum and you've only got a couple of staff members and your communications are perhaps limited, you can still do what we're talking about. It's all scalable. and figuring out what's doable for you that you can do sustainably. And we are communicating regularly with our donors and our museum members. So we include the legislators in with them. And so we invite people to come to the museum all the time. The only thing that's not part of our regular routine really is the delegation meetings. It's a particular tool in the toolbox. Your local delegation meets usually at least once a year. You can find out about those from your local representative, from FAM can help you. There's lots of resources for how to find out how to plug into that. Once you know your local representative, they'll be able to plug you in. FAM's working on one level, and then if you are fortunate to have a lobbyist, or you're part of another organization that has a lobbyist, like your Chamber of Commerce perhaps, they're out there doing a lot of good work, and it's important to remember that you're not alone. There are others who can help support the same message, and that we also, as an individual museum, want to be on the same page with. So next slide, please. I came to Florida from working in Chicago, so the concept of early and often is in our blood. You want to be communicating with your legislators early and often. As Greg had said, it's all about relationships. We're communicating with our donors regularly. Look at our legislators as major donors, and sometimes maybe even a little bit reporter, in the sense that we always want them to hear our news from us first, whether it's good news, we're having a capital campaign, we're opening a new wing, we have a new program, we served however many people, or whether it's the bad news. Here at the Bishop, we had a tragedy 2 years ago where Snooty, the oldest known manatee, died in our care. And we wanted everyone to hear that from us first, and we needed to know who our primary people were, so to notify immediately. So having our legislators at the top of those lists is really important. And then the idea that the legislators are interested and involved in both policy and funding. As an example, here at the Bishop, since we're part of the Manatee Rehabilitation Network, we are interested in and we have expertise on manatee rehabilitation, the plight of manatees in Florida. There are times when the state legislators, our particular legislator, might want some information. We can offer that. We want them to know, just like we want our reporters to know, we want them to know what we're experts on. Just by sending them your regular materials, you'll be able to help them know what you can be a resource on to help them. And then it's a two-way relationship. Make sure you know who your candidates are. If you're going to be communicating with the current elected officials, back to that point of being nonpartisan, we want to be communicating with everyone. This last election cycle, our CEO invited all of the candidates in, regardless of whether they were in a current office or not. That way we knew we were telling everybody the same thing, giving everyone the same opportunity. Not everyone took advantage of the opportunity. There we go. Mailing lists, you just have to mark a calendar to once every, whether it's September, October, whatever it is, make sure that in your local municipality, you know when you want to keep those up to date. And the idea that as Greg was saying, different people that are interested in public service move around a little bit, whether they're a current staffer or they might be a county commissioner now. They can move to the state legislature, move to then the federal legislation perhaps, or governor's office or whatever it might be. So your investment in time and the education is going to serve the organization very well over time. Plus, they're all working together, so we want them to all know the same things about us. So we keep our mailing list to include the city, the county, the state, and then in our vicinity, our local federal officials. Also, the rules of who you can invite. And this is one, if there's questions at the end, I would ask Greg and Melinda to talk about that, because here in Manatee County, we can, if we invite one county legislator, we have to invite everyone unless it is an absolute public event. And so you want to make sure you're doing something that will make them comfortable. Occasionally, we'll have them ask us, did you invite everyone? So we want to make sure we let them know that this is a public thing, or this is a whatever kind of event it is we're inviting them to. Site visits, again, our CEO invited everyone in, come see us. We also do that throughout the year. If we have a particular program that we're doing with the school district, we invite our legislators in. If we're releasing a manatee, we will try to let them know if there's the opportunity for them to go see it. Something that is regular as Greg has said, Melinda talked about, we're not asking them for anything. We're just sharing what we do. And then those local delegation meetings are something that are really important if you can plug into them. And I know I don't know the geography well enough to know how accessible that is for everyone, but in our area, it is particularly relevant. Okay, next slide. And all of your communications media, a lot of times I think it's easy to think, oh, we send this to our donors, we send this to our members, we put this press release out. Or, oh, we didn't tell anybody about it because it's not a big enough deal. If you can just put a tickler on your calendar once a month to make sure you've got something you're telling folks to remind them that you're there. School groups, it's summer camp, it's back to school, whatever it is for your museum that's a rhythm that's relevant. We, as a natural history museum, have way too many opportunities. Like right now, we're heavy into the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Not everybody has those kinds of opportunities, but something is there that allows you to say, hey, we're doing this. So just spend a little bit of time thinking about that. Inviting them to all of your cultivation opportunities, major donors, and I think of them, as I said before, a little bit like a reporter. We want them to think of us as a resource as well as a partner. What you do as an important part of your community, you should have a relationship with your representative as an important part of your community. Even if there isn't anything that you're going to be asking for, we play such an important role, whether it's economically or whether it's in the education system, the cultural quality of life of our communities. We want them to know that we're there and what we have to offer. There's a little bit of protocol, and again, if anybody has questions, I imagine Greg and Melinda can address this better than I can, but to know on your mailing list who should be addressed as the honorable and how to handle, if the legislator is a woman, how do you put the husband on there, how to do all of that kind of stuff. Respect goes a long way, and if you don't know the lingo, sometimes it's easy to be disrespectful and not know that you're doing that. And the staff members can help us with that a lot. It's knowing that person who's on the other end of the phone in a small office. Sometimes it's just the one person who's in your district, and they help us a lot. Also within their offices, there's a little bit, if we're doing a groundbreaking, we go to the scheduler to talk about it after we've talked to somebody else. Knowing that it's a big enough deal, we put that on our PR side of an opening or something, but to have an idea of who in the different offices has staff and what they do, so that you have a sense of how to be most efficient with them. And also it gives you insight as to how they work. And as Greg has talked about, what's important to them. Some of them really want FaceTime in their district. Some of them, not so much. It's not as important. Okay, next slide, please. And this is a really basic one. Just start now. Early, often, now. Greg was talking about the cycle now, how we're not in any particular part of the legislative cycle with a summer hiatus, so to speak. Put together those lists now. You know who you're going to want to be in touch with, so that starting in September, starting in August, you can be in touch with them, invite them in, be thinking about what's coming, so that we're giving them an opportunity to get to know us when it is not their busiest time also. Sometimes it's much easier for them to schedule a morning visit during the summer than it is in committee weeks during September or whatever it is. So early, often, and now. And with a little bit of organization, it does not have to take a ton of time. If you've already got your list, you've got your emails, you've got your printed, whatever it is you send by a snail mail. If you've got the right people on the list, you're going to be sending stuff to your constituents anyway. Just include them. So, okay, next slide. One of the things that is most important from a communications perspective for me is knowing what you want to say when you do have that opportunity to show someone through your facility, talk to someone about your programs, visit them in their office for 15 minutes and give them some of your newsletters or whatever it is. There's always something we can thank them for, even when there was no grant money at the state level. We had something we could thank them for. As strange as it sounds, they don't hear that from people as often as you might think, and it does stand out. And it shows that we appreciate and we respect what their role in the community is. We're asking them to respect us and understand our role in the community. And tying back in with Greg's point of knowing what's important to our different legislators, we might talk more about manatees to one. We at the Bishop might talk more about our work with the school system in another, depending on what their interest level is or what their focal point of their agenda is. So knowing the audience that you're going to be talking to or touring, and then do I know what I really want to say? Do I want to throw statistics at them and tell them how many kids, how many visitors we have, what our economic impact is? And then why am I telling them that? The impact that we're having. The kids who came to the VPK here at the Bishop Museum actually were a little bit ahead of the kids in the regular system. This was extraordinary. We can't take all the credit for it because their teacher was exceptional, but it was clearly a really effective thing. We want you to know that there's some innovative stuff going on in this community and we're part of it. What do you really want them to know? So next slide, please. So what do you really want them to know? The impact is a major one, tying back to the same thing that we want to talk to donors about. They want to know that the investment is worthwhile. They want to know that there is a good chance that whatever it is you're setting out to do is feasible, that you are equipped and competent and capable to do it, and that it is reasonable for you to need help doing it, whether it's through policy or financing. And the question that we always try to ask is, so what? Well, we're opening a new wing. So what? It's a major new thing for our community. So what? No one else has this level of a resource for the early learning community, and we're working directly with the school district. Oh, okay. Well, so what's the value of that? We're bringing private resources to the public sector, and we can connect them in a way no one else in our area can. That's what I want to tell them. That's the so what. And if you're in fundraising or communications, PR in any sense, you probably hear about storytelling in every email you get. What is your story? How do you talk about your organization, your role in your community? Who's the person who should be telling it? If you're able to have a site visit, if you're able to visit with your legislator, or you're sending them a written update, who's the best person to tell that story? Is it the CEO? Is it a constituent who you serve? We're fortunate that our board chair happens to have grown up with, right now, our state representative. 3 years ago, that was not the case. And so we had a representative with a different set of interests. Our CEO was the appropriate person to really be the best emissary there. We oftentimes use the same people, the same stories and examples that we use in our fundraising materials. They're compelling. They're at the heart of who we are and what we do. And then, are there illustrations? As odd as it sounds from the way we're talking about legislators so exclusively, they are people too. Once again, just like reporters, they are real people. Pictures are fabulous. Do you have photos that tell the story, support what you're talking about? Share them, send them, don't forget about them. They make a huge difference to really work the emotional connection as well as the intellectual and rational reasons for supporting and helping us or knowing and understanding what we do. Also, as in with any audience, knowing what their lingo and their terminology means. If you're in the process of talking about a bill, talking about the member of the delegation, there's a variety of vocabulary that's important to understand. And again, Melinda can help you with that if you've not heard it before. There's a few of them that can be kind of funny if you hear them out of context. And those are my main things about communications. So it's really keep talking, sharing, and just have that relationship in the same way that you do with the rest of your supporters, because you're doing really important work in your community and these folks need to know about it and probably want to support it if they know how. So that's the world according to Martha.
Hey, this is Greg. There's two things that I think Martha touched on that are really important too. Is one, she mentioned that a lot of the same material we use was stuff that we're already using for donors. I think it's important that whatever is comfortable for you in your advocacy efforts, whoever you are, whoever your organization is and what you represent, don't change your stripes. Be who you are. Keep a consistent message so that is, you're not getting caught ever having kind of inconsistent messaging out there, inconsistent material. That never helps anybody in any situation. So don't try to be something you're not. Be upfront with them, be honest, be quick in your response, but only if you're confident that the answer is right. Because the worst thing you can do is kind of false start, right? And when I say that is, Martha said start now, and we have already started planning for next year, because your success starts in the summer. Even though nothing official is going on now, internally, get your ducks in a row now if you do have an ask, or if something's going to come up in the next 3 or 4 months that you believe is going to have legislative attention or impact, because they're going to get bogged down very quickly with information, and you want to get there early, or as early as you can, and bird dog it throughout the entire process from start to finish. So those are my last 2 things.
That's great. Thank you, Greg. Thank you,